In the sterile silence of courtroom 4B, he called her his greatest liability. Alistair Finch, the titan of tech, looked at the woman he was divorcing after 12 years and saw nothing but a beautiful, expensive ornament he was finally shedding. She said not a single word in her own defense, accepting a settlement so small it was an insult, a rounding error in his vast fortune. He walked out triumphant, ready to conquer the world. But what Alistair didn't know was that silence can be the most patient predator. While he was celebrating his freedom, she was signing a contract. And just 10 days later, the financial world was rocked by a single headline. Helena Vance, the silent ex-wife, had just been named the new CEO of his biggest rival. This isn't just a story about a divorce. It's about the catastrophic cost of underestimation. The courtroom was a study in cold opulence, much like the life Alistair Finch and Helena Vance had shared. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy mahogany, and the air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous tune that did nothing to ease the tension. Alistair, founder and CEO of the billion-dollar fintech giant Clara Analytics, sat with his back ramrod straight. His suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row Taylor, Anderson & Shepard, was impeccable. To his side, his lawyer, a shark named Lawrence Adler, shuffled papers with performative importance. Across the aisle sat Helena. If Alistair was a portrait of power, Helena was one of unnerving stillness. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that spoke of quiet money, not the flashy couture Alistair had always insisted upon. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat chignon, revealing the clean, intelligent lines of her face. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were fixed on the judge, betraying no emotion. No anger, no sadness, no fear. Just a profound, impenetrable calm. Mr. Finch, the judge began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. Your filings cite irreconcilable differences, primarily stemming from what your counsel describes as a divergence in professional and intellectual pursuits. Lawrence Adler cleared his throat. That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Finch is at the forefront of global algorithmic trading. His life is one of immense pressure and intellectual rigor. Mrs. Vance, while a wonderful hostess and a supportive partner for many years, does not share that world. The chasm simply became too wide to bridge. It was a masterclass in polite condescension. She's not smart enough for me. That was the message delivered in legalese. Alistair glanced at Helena, expecting a flicker of indignation, a tear, anything. He got nothing. Her silence was absolute. The settlement was the next point of order. It was by all accounts a joke. Alistair was worth an estimated $2.8 billion. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad, but even so, a wife of 12 years could have fought for a substantial sum, a percentage of the wealth accumulated during their marriage. The media had predicted a war, a battle of titans that would splash across the pages of the Wall Street Journal and Vanity Fair for months. Instead, Helena had asked for a single lump sum of $5 million, the deed to a modest brownstone in Boston she had inherited from her grandmother, and a gag order preventing Alistair from speaking publicly about her. Adler presented the terms with a triumphant smirk. My client finds these terms surprisingly amicable, Your Honor. He has graciously agreed. Graciously? Alistair nearly scoffed. He was buying his freedom for the price of a rounding error. He had spent more on a yacht he used twice a year. The $5 million was a pittance, a way to be seen as fair while utterly dominating the proceedings. He had expected her to fight, to scream, to hire her own pack of legal wolves. He had been prepared for a battle. This quiet acquiescence was frankly unsettling. Mrs. Vance, the judge, said, turning to her. Her lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Clara Bennett, placed a hand on her arm. You have reviewed these terms. You understand that you are waiving any and all future claims to Mr. Finch's estate, his business holdings, his stock options, and any assets related to Clara and Analytics. Helena turned her head slightly. For the first time, her eyes met Alistair's across the aisle. There was no pain in her gaze, no lingering affection. There was something else, something he couldn't decipher. It looked almost like pity. Yes, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was clear and steady without a hint of tremor. "I understand. I agree to the terms." That was it. The only 2 sentences she had spoken all morning. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sealed the end of their 12-year marriage. Allister felt a surge of pure, unadulterated relief. It was over. He was free. Free from the social obligations, free from the pretense of a partnership, free from the quiet judgment he sometimes saw in her eyes when he'd come home late smelling of whiskey and ambition. As they filed out, he walked past her. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to say something, to offer a final patronizing olive branch. "Helena," he said, stopping her, "I do wish you the best. Find something to keep you busy." She paused and looked up at him. The look in her eyes was no longer pity. It was something colder, sharper. It was the look of a strategist assessing an opponent. "Don't worry about me, Allister," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I'll be fine." Then she walked away, her heels clicking with quiet finality on the marble floor, leaving Allister Finch standing in the echoing hall, the undisputed victor of a battle his opponent had never even bothered to fight. Or so he thought. The week following the divorce was a blur of self-congratulation for Allister Finch. He threw a lavish freedom party at his penthouse overlooking Central Park, a sprawling palace of glass and steel. The guest list was a who's who of Wall Street predators and Silicon Valley wunderkinds. Dom Perignon flowed like water, and the air buzzed with the masculine energy of conquest. To Allister, toasted Marcus Thorne Etherion's Keogh, and Allister's most loyal sycophant. Finally unshackled, ready to take Etherion into the stratosphere. Allister raised his glass, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "The dead weight is gone, Marcus. From now on, it's pure, unadulterated focus." He regaled his audience with a sanitized, dismissive version of the divorce. "She was smart enough to know she couldn't win," he'd say with a chuckle. Took the settlement and ran. Probably off to Boston to redecorate her grandmother's old house. A nice little hobby for her. The men around him would laugh, their wives and girlfriends smiling tightly. They all knew Helena, or knew of her. The impeccably dressed silent woman at Allister's side at every gala, every fundraiser. The one who could discuss Renaissance art or geopolitical tensions in the South China Sea with equal fluency, only to have Allister cut in with a patronizing "Helena's my cultural attaché. Aren't you, darling?" He had painted her as a beautiful, intelligent, but ultimately ambitionless creature, content to live in his shadow. And she had never contradicted him. His focus now was singular Project Chimera. It was Etherion's magnum opus, a predictive AI algorithm designed to corner the commodities market. It was years in the making, a complex, revolutionary piece of code that would make Etherion Analytics not just a major player, but the undisputed king. The final phase of development was underway, and they were courting the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, the Arabian Caliphate Fund, for an exclusive multi-billion-dollar contract. Their only real competitor was Cygnus Dynamics. Cygnus was the perennial underdog, always a step behind Etherion. They were scrappy, innovative, but lacked Allister's killer instinct and Etherion's sheer financial muscle. Their CEO, a plodding but decent man named Richard Davies, was retiring, and the company was seen as being in a vulnerable state of transition. Allister considered them a nuisance, not a threat. "Davies is out to pasture," Allister said in a board meeting a few days later, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. "Cygnus is rudderless. Their tech is 2 years behind ours. The Caliphate Fund deal is a formality. We just need to close." He felt invincible. His personal life was streamlined. His professional life was about to reach its zenith. He had everything he wanted. On the 10th day after his divorce, Allister was at his desk reviewing the final proposal for Project Chimera. His phone buzzed with a news alert from Bloomberg. He glanced at it, expecting another update on market fluctuations. The headline made the world stop. "Shake-up in tech, Cygnus Dynamics appoints Helena Vance as new CEO." Allister stared at the screen. He read the name again. And again. Helena Vance. It had to be a mistake. A different Helena Vance. A typo. He clicked the link. The article opened to a professionally shot photograph of Helena. It was a picture he'd never seen before. She wasn't smiling her soft socialite smile. Her expression was focused, her eyes sharp with an intensity he hadn't seen since the day in the courtroom. She looked powerful. She looked formidable. He read the first paragraph, his blood turning to ice. Cygnus Dynamics announced today that its board has unanimously appointed Helena Vance as its new chief executive officer, effective immediately. Vance, a reclusive figure in the tech world, brings a formidable but largely unknown background to the role. The appointment comes as a shock to Wall Street, positioning Cygnus for an aggressive new chapter in its rivalry with industry leader Clara Analytics. Alistair's hand trembled. Reclusive figure in the tech world. Formidable background. What were they talking about? He had met her when she was curating a modern art exhibit. She had a master's in art history. That was her story. That was the story he told everyone. He scrolled down, his heart pounding in his chest. The article continued. While known in social circles as the former wife of Ethereum CEO Alastair Finch, Vance's early career is a stark contrast. She holds a Ph.D. in applied mathematics and computational science from MIT. Her doctoral thesis, Stochastic Modeling in High-Frequency Trading Environments, is still considered a foundational text in quantitative finance. Before her marriage, she was the co-founder of Quantum Leap, a predictive analytics startup that was quietly acquired by a private equity firm for an undisclosed 9-figure sum in 2013, the year before she married him. The room began to spin. The 9-figure sum, the Ph.D. from MIT, the startup. He had known she was smart, of course. But this was a different universe of intellect. A universe she had kept completely hidden from him for 12 years. He remembered conversations, fragments of moments he had dismissed. Her asking pointed questions about his algorithms, which he'd brushed off as idle curiosity. Her sketching complex diagrams on a napkin once at dinner, which he'd teased her about, calling them her doodles. Her uncanny ability to predict market shifts before his own analysts, which he'd laughed off as woman's intuition. He had demanded she leave her world behind. There can only be one star in this family, he had told her early on, half joking, half threatening. And I'm the one building the empire. She hadn't just agreed. She had systematically erased her past. She had played the part of the perfect, non-threatening wife so flawlessly that he had believed the performance was the person. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had created the perfect enemy, armed her with a decade of his secrets, and then set her free. His phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne, his voice frantic. "Alistair, did you see the news? It's her. It's Helena. What the hell is going on?" Alistair couldn't speak. He looked out the window at the city that was supposed to be his kingdom. Across the skyline, a few miles downtown, was the headquarters of Cygnus Dynamics. He imagined Helena walking into the CEO's office, his rival's office. The silence in the courtroom suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator that had just locked onto its prey. The shockwave of Helena Vance's appointment ripped through the financial world. It was the story of the week. News outlets dug into her past, unearthing the brilliant, buried career of the woman everyone had written off. The narrative shifted overnight. She wasn't the spurned ex-wife. She was the hidden dragon, the ghost in the machine who had been living inside the walls of her greatest rival for over a decade. Alistair was in a state of controlled fury. He convened an emergency meeting with his executive team. "This is a publicity stunt," he snarled, pacing the boardroom. "A desperate move by a failing company. They're using my name, my divorce, to get a headline. She has no experience running a corporation of that size." "None." "With all due respect," Alistair said, "David Hayes, his head of strategy, her background is more than just academic. Quantum Leap was a serious player, and she's been observing our operations from the inside for 12 years. The unspoken words hung in the air. She knows everything. She knows our social calendar. Alistair shot back, his voice dangerously low. She doesn't know our code, our strategy, our proprietary data. She was signing off on floral arrangements, not on algorithmic architecture. But even as he said it, a cold dread seeped into his bones. Had she been that good an actress? He replayed their life together in his mind, searching for clues. He saw her sitting quietly in the corner of his home office while he took late-night calls, her reading a book while he muttered about market vulnerabilities. He saw her glancing at documents he'd left on the kit, Hayes counter schematics for Project Chimera among them. He had assumed she was disinterested, her mind on whatever charity gala was next on the agenda. Now he saw a different picture, a spy gathering intelligence under the guise of domesticity. Helena, meanwhile, did not make a grand dramatic entrance. There were no sweeping interviews or magazine covers. Her first move was as quiet and precise as her demeanor in the courtroom. It came in the form of an email, a company-wide memo at Cygnus Dynamics. It was leaked to the press within an hour. The subject line was simple: Day 1. The memo was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. It didn't mention Etherion by name. It didn't need to. Helena laid out a new vision for Cygnus, focusing on asymmetric competition and exploiting market inefficiencies created by monolithic incumbents. It was a direct surgical strike at Etherion's business model. She spoke of agility, innovation, and a culture of rewarding unrecognized genius. The last two words were the real message. A week later, the first defection happened. Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to Marcus Etherion's most brilliant but notoriously difficult data scientist, resigned. She was a savant in predictive modeling, but Alistair had always found her abrasive and hadn't given her the senior role she craved. An hour after her resignation, Cygnus Dynamics announced she had been hired as their new chief technology officer. Alistair was apoplectic. How did she even know about Eris? He roared at Marcus. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Helena met her once, at the company Christmas party 3 years ago. You told Eris her dress was a bit much, and then ignored her for the rest of the night. Helena spoke with her for nearly an hour about quantum computing. Alistair felt a chill. The Christmas party. He barely remembered it. To him it was a chore. To Helena it had apparently been a recruiting event. The defections continued. A junior programmer who had identified a critical flaw in Etherion's beta platform, a flaw Alistair had dismissed, was hired as a team lead at Cygnus. 2 of his best salespeople who had complained about Etherion's rigid commission structure were poached with offers that included equity in Cygnus. Helena was targeting the people Alistair had undervalued. She wasn't just stealing his talent. She was wielding his own arrogance as a weapon against him. She knew who he overlooked, who he patronized, who he failed to appreciate. For 12 years she had been a silent witness to his managerial blind spots. The battle for the Caliphate Fund contract intensified. It was no longer a formality. The fund's representatives, who had been on the verge of signing with Etherion, now insisted on a full competitive bake-off. Etherion's Project Chimera versus whatever Cygnus could muster. Alistair doubled down. He pushed his team to the breaking point, demanding longer hours, faster results. His paranoia grew. He ordered security audits and had NDAs re-signed. He saw Helena's ghost everywhere, in every setback, in every line of code that wasn't perfect. They're anticipating our every move, he said to Marcus one night, staring at a comparative analysis. Cygnus had just released a patch for their existing software that seemed to preemptively counter a key feature of Chimera. It's impossible. It's like she's in our servers. Or she was in your head for 12 years, Marcus muttered just loud enough to be heard. Alistair turned on him, his eyes blazing. What did you say? Nothing, Marcus said quickly, backing down. Just, she knows how you think, Alistair. She knows your playbook. It was true. Helena wasn't hacking his company. She was hacking his mind. She knew he favored aggressive brute force strategies. So she was using nimble, precise counter-moves. She knew he valued loyalty over raw talent, so she targeted the brilliant people he'd alienated. She knew his biggest weakness was his ego, his belief that he was the smartest person in any room. And for the first time in his life, Alistair Finch was facing an opponent who knew him better than he knew himself. The empire he was so proud of suddenly felt terrifyingly fragile, and the woman he had dismissed as a decorative object was the one holding the hammer. The pressure mounted. The Caliphate Fund set a deadline of final presentation in 3 weeks at the Global Finance Summit in Geneva. It would be the ultimate showdown. Ethereum and Cygnus would present their platforms back to back. The winner would walk away with the largest contract in the industry's history. Alistair drove his team with a relentless manic energy. The offices of Ethereum Analytics, once a place of sleek, confident ambition, became a high-pressure cooker of fear and exhaustion. He slept in his office, surviving on caffeine and the burning fuel of his rage. Project Chimera had to be perfect. It was more than a contract now. It was a referendum on his genius. He focused on the algorithm's power. Chimera was a beast designed to analyze trillions of data points in real time to predict market shifts with 99.7% accuracy. It was a sledgehammer built to dominate. He was convinced its raw computational superiority was unassailable. Meanwhile, news from Cygnus was sparse, but what trickled out was unsettling. Under Helena's leadership, they weren't trying to build a bigger, better version of Chimera. Whispers on Wall Street spoke of a completely different approach. They were calling their project Callisto. Instead of predicting the entire market, Callisto was reportedly designed to identify and exploit the blind spots of other algorithms. It wasn't a sledgehammer, it was a scalpel. It was designed not to beat the market, but to beat the players in the market, specifically players like Ethereum. Alistair dismissed it as a gimmick. "A parasite," he sneered. "It can't survive without a host. Our Chimera is the host. It's the ecosystem. They're irrelevant." But a seed of doubt had been planted. He remembered a conversation with Helena years ago. They were on their yacht in the Aegean. He was boasting about an early version of his predictive engine. "It's infallible," he had said, swirling a glass of scotch. "Nothing built by man is infallible," she had replied, looking out at the horizon. "Every perfect system has a fatal flaw, usually created by the hubris of its architect. The more complex the system, the more elegant the flaw." He had laughed at her, patting her on the head. "Stick to art, my love. Leave the math to me." The memory now haunted him, the hubris of its architect. 2 weeks before the Geneva presentation, a critical vulnerability was discovered deep within Chimera's code. It was a small, almost undetectable paradox in the learning algorithm. Under specific rare market conditions, a black swan event, the algorithm, instead of protecting assets, would enter a feedback loop, exponentially amplifying losses. It was a 1-in-a-million flaw. The team was panicked. David Hayes, his head of strategy, recommended they disclose the vulnerability to the fund and push the deadline. "Absolutely not," Alistair commanded. "The odds of those conditions occurring are infinitesimal. We fix it quietly. No one breathes a word of this outside this room. We do not show weakness." But the fix was not simple. It was woven into the very fabric of the AI's logic. Unraveling it would take weeks, maybe months. Alistair ordered a patch, a workaround. It was a clumsy, inelegant solution, a piece of digital duct tape over a structural crack. It held, but the team knew it was a compromise. The 99.7% accuracy now had an asterisk next to it. The night before they were scheduled to fly to Geneva, Alistair was alone in the boardroom staring at the final presentation slides. His reflection stared back from the darkened glass of the window, a tired, haunted man. His phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single attachment, a PDF document. His fingers trembled as he opened it. It was a page from a notebook filled with Helena's neat, precise handwriting. It was a complex equation, a series of mathematical proofs. He recognized the structure immediately. It was the core logic of his Chimera algorithm. But at the bottom of the page, she had continued the equation, extending it beyond his own work. She had circled the final result. It was the exact paradoxical feedback loop his team had just discovered. The fatal flaw. Beneath the circle there was a handwritten note. I found this in your study notes 3 years ago. I tried to tell you it was there. You told me I was doodling. H. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the polished table. 3 years ago. She had seen it 3 years ago. The flaw wasn't a bug his team had just found. It was a fundamental error in his design that his own wife, the art historian, the party planner, had identified, and that he had been too arrogant to even consider. He had walked into her trap. She hadn't needed a mole. She hadn't needed to hack his servers. She had his entire playbook because she had helped write it silently from the wings. She knew about the flaw in Chimera before he did, and she had built her entire strategy around it. Callisto wasn't designed to beat Chimera. It was designed to trigger its flaw, to create the very black swan event that would turn his greatest weapon back on itself. He now understood the full, terrifying scope of her strategy. The Geneva presentation wasn't just a sales pitch. It was a public execution. His execution. The air in the grand ballroom of the Geneva International Conference Center was thick with money and anticipation. Alistair stood backstage adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His hands were clammy. For the first time in his professional life, he felt a tremor of genuine fear. He had seen Helena earlier across the crowded hall. She was the picture of serene confidence, surrounded by her new executive team, Aris Thorne, at her side. She hadn't looked at him, but he felt her presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. Etherion was presenting first. Alistair walked onto the stage to a polite, expectant applause. The Caliphate Fund's delegation, led by the formidable Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum, sat in the front row, their faces impassive. Alistair launched into his presentation. He was a master showman, and his voice boomed with practiced authority. He spoke of power, of dominance, of market supremacy. The screens behind him lit up with dazzling graphics, showcasing Chimera's awesome processing capabilities. Project Chimera is not just an evolution, he declared, his voice ringing with forced confidence. It is a revolution. It is financial omniscience. He carefully avoided any mention of the flaw, glossing over the risk management protocols with vague corporate speak. He felt the Sheikh's sharp eyes on him, probing, searching for weakness. Alistair ended with a flourish, painting a picture of a future where Etherion and the fund would rewrite the rules of global finance together. The applause was solid but not thunderous. The questions from the panel were pointed, focusing on volatility and risk. Alistair parried them as best he could, but he felt sweat trickle down his back. Then it was Cygnus's turn. Helena walked onto the stage. She wore a simple tailored gray suit, no jewelry except for a plain watch. She was not a showman. She didn't pace or gesture wildly. She stood at the lectern and simply began to speak, her voice calm and measured. Good morning, I'm Helena Vance, CEO of Cygnus Dynamics. My competitor has just presented you with a sledgehammer. It is a powerful tool designed to knock down walls. And it is in its own way very impressive. She paused, letting the faint praise hang in the air before twisting the knife. But the future of finance is not about brute force. It's about precision. It is not a battle of sledgehammers. It is a game of chess. It's about knowing what your opponent will do before they do. It's about understanding their strengths and, more importantly, understanding their weaknesses. Behind her, the screen lit up. It did not show flashy graphics. It showed a single elegant line of code. This is Project Callisto, she continued. It does not seek to predict the entire market. It seeks to predict the behavior of the market's largest players, specifically predictive AIs like the one you just saw. These monolithic systems, for all their power, have predictable behaviors. They are driven by the philosophies of their creators. Alistair's blood ran cold. She was talking directly about him. Some architects favor aggression. Helena said, her eyes sweeping over the front row and for a fleeting moment locking with Alistair's. They build systems designed for overwhelming force. But this philosophy inevitably creates a blind spot, a belief in their own infallibility. An Achilles heel. Callisto is designed to find that heel. She then walked the delegation through a simulation, a hypothetical market scenario. On one side of the screen was a representation of a powerful aggressive trading algorithm chimera in all but name. On the other was Callisto. She initiated the simulation. At first, the chimera algorithm dominated, racking up huge virtual profits. Then Helena's team introduced a specific set of market variables. A sudden unexpected political event in a small country, a minor disruption in a shipping lane. The Black Swan event. On the screen, the audience watched in stunned silence as the chimera algorithm, instead of adjusting, began to hemorrhage money. The feedback loop kicked in. The AI began making catastrophic trades, doubling down on its losses in a frantic self-destructive spiral. Within minutes, its virtual profits were wiped out, replaced by a staggering, irrecoverable debt. Meanwhile, Callisto, which had been making small, careful trades, executed a single perfect move, capitalizing on the larger algorithm's death spiral. The demonstration was devastatingly clear. Callisto hadn't beaten the market. It had waited for Chimera to beat itself, and then it had picked up the spoils. Helena clicked off the screen. The room was silent. Power is not the same as strength. She concluded, her voice quiet but resonant. True strength lies in understanding, not in force. We are not offering you a sledgehammer that may one day shatter in your hand. We are offering you a scalpel. We are offering you insight. Thank you. She walked off the stage to a moment of stunned silence, which was then broken by a sudden explosive wave of applause. Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum stood up, leading the ovation. He was not looking at the stage. He was looking directly at Alistair Finch, and on his face was a look of profound disappointment. In that moment, Alistair knew it was over. He had lost. He had not just been outmaneuvered. He had been dissected, analyzed, and defeated by a strategy born from 12 years of his own hubris. He was the architect of his own destruction, and Helena Vance was merely the one who had presented the blueprints to the world. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The news that the Caliphate Fund had awarded the contract to Cygnus Dynamics hit the wires before Alistair's plane had even touched down in New York. Ethereum Analytics' stock plummeted by 40% in pre-market trading. The board was in open revolt. Marcus Thorne, his once loyal COO, was now leading the charge for his removal, positioning himself as the stable hand needed to guide the company through the crisis. Alistair was locked out of his own kingdom. He was forced to take a leave of absence, a corporate euphemism for being fired. The empire he had built with his bare hands had crumbled in a single afternoon. He spent his days in his cavernous, empty penthouse, the silence now a suffocating presence. The celebratory champagne bottles from his divorce party seemed to mock him from the wine cooler. 2 weeks after the Geneva disaster, his secretary informed him he had a visitor. He didn't have the energy to refuse. The elevator doors opened and Helena Vance walked into his living room. She looked different. The serene, controlled confidence she projected as a CEO was still there, but there was also a softness in her expression he hadn't seen since their earliest years together. She was no longer the silent wife or the rival CEO. She was just Helena. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Come to gloat, to see the ruins." "No, Alistair," she said softly, walking over to the vast window and looking out at the city. "I came for a final conversation, one we should have had a decade ago." They stood in silence for a long moment. "Why?" He finally asked the question loaded with 1,000 others. "Why hide it? The PhD, the startup, all of it. Why let me treat you like you were nothing?" Helena turned to face him. "Because I loved you," she said, her voice clear and devoid of pity. "And you told me there was only room for one star. I was young and I thought that love meant sacrifice. So I sacrificed my world for yours. I thought naively that one day you would turn around and see me, the real me, and love me for it. But you never did." You only saw the reflection you wanted to see." The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. "I buried Helena Vance, the mathematician, so Helena Finch, the socialite, could exist," she continued. "And for a long time I think I even managed to forget her myself. I planned parties, chaired charities, and listened to you talk about your triumphs. But I also listened when you talked about your fears, your rivals, your weaknesses. I read the documents you left out. Not because I was a spy, but because I was your wife and your world was my world. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to help." She gestured around the opulent room. "And then I realized you didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. The moment I tried to offer a genuine opinion to point out the flaw in your logic, you patted me on the head and told me to stick to art. That was the day our marriage truly died." It was also the day Helena Vance started planning her return. "The divorce," he murmured. "The silence. The settlement." "It was strategy," she confirmed. "If I had fought you, if I had demanded half your fortune, you would have buried me in litigation for years. You would have seen me as a threat. But by being silent, by accepting a pittance, I made you underestimate me one last time. You saw me as a defeated woman. You didn't see me as a competitor re-entering the market with a 12-year head start on understanding her primary target. The $5 million wasn't a settlement, Alistair. It was seed money." He sank into a chair, the full weight of his failure crashing down on him. He hadn't just lost a company. He had lost the most brilliant person he had ever known because he had been too blind to see her. "So what now?" he asked, his voice broken. "Now Cygnus thrives," she said, a hint of steel returning to her voice. "And you get to decide who Alistair Finch is without Etherian. Maybe for the first time you'll build something that isn't based on the need to be the only star in the sky." She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, Alistair," she said, looking back at him one last time, "I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted to be seen. You're the one who made this a war." Then she was gone, leaving Alistair Finch alone with the ghost of the woman he had created and the ruins of the man he used to be. 1 year later, the New York skyline had a new gleaming addition. The Cygnus Dynamics Tower, a marvel of modern sustainable architecture, stood tall in the heart of the financial district. Its offices were open, collaborative spaces filled with the vibrant hum of innovation. Helena Vance stood in her office on the top floor. It was not the imposing solitary throne room that Alistair had favored. It was a light-filled space with a large round table at its center surrounded by whiteboards covered in complex equations and strategic plans. Eris Thorne and her other executives were with her, laughing as they debated a new venture. Helena had transformed Cygnus from an underdog into a new kind of industry leader. They were lauded for their ethical approach to AI, their dynamic company culture, and their visionary CEO. She was on the cover of Forbes not as a socialite or an ex-wife, but as the strategist who had redefined the tech landscape. She was dating a quiet, brilliant astrophysicist from Columbia University who was completely unimpressed by her fortune but fascinated by her mind. She was for the first time in over a decade completely and utterly herself. Across the city, in a much smaller, more modest office, Alistair Finch was trying to build again. Etherian had been acquired in a hostile takeover, its assets absorbed by a larger competitor. Marcus Thorne was long gone, pushed out by the new leadership. Alistair had started a small consulting firm. He was humbled, stripped of his power and wealth. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary knowledge. He had 2 employees. He worked late, not fueled by ambition, but by the simple need to create something of value again, something real. Sometimes, late at night, he would look out his window at the distant shining beacon of the Cygnus Tower. He didn't feel hatred anymore. He felt a profound sense of loss and a strange, grudging respect. He had been so obsessed with building an empire of glass and steel that he had failed to recognize the true treasure that was living in his own house. He had once told her there could only be one star. He had been right. He had just been spectacularly, catastrophically wrong about which one it was. Helena's light wasn't just shining. It was illuminating the entire city, a city that now felt like it belonged to her. And he was just a man on the ground looking up, finally seeing her clearly in the dark. 2 years passed. The name Helena Vance was no longer synonymous with a dramatic divorce, but with visionary leadership. Cygnus Dynamics had not only thrived, it had set a new industry standard for ethical AI and sustainable growth. Helena, the keynote speaker at the 2025 Web Summit in Lisbon, stood before a rapt audience of thousands. She spoke not of market domination, but of responsibility, not of predictive power, but of technological humility. She had become the conscience of an industry long thought to have none. The greatest danger of our creations, she concluded, her voice echoing through the vast arena, is not that they will become smarter than us, but that we will forget they are a reflection of us. Our brilliance, yes, but also our biases, our blind spots, and our hubris. As the applause thundered, a frantic aide rushed to the side of the stage holding up a tablet. The screen was a cascade of blood-red financial tickers. Helena's face remained impassive, but a flicker of concern crossed her eyes. This was not normal market volatility. This was a hemorrhage. By the time her corporate jet was in the air heading back to New York, the world was in chaos. It was being called the Digital Blitz, a cyber attack of unprecedented scale and sophistication. It wasn't aimed at a single bank or exchange. It was targeting the very trust architecture of the global financial system. Algorithms from New York to Tokyo, London to Hong Kong were behaving erratically, triggering cascading sell-offs in a feedback loop that was threatening to vaporize trillions of dollars in wealth. Helena's own creation, Callisto, was struggling. It was designed to be a scalpel to dissect the logical, predictable flaws of competitors. But this new threat wasn't logical. It was pure weaponized chaos. It didn't have a rational weakness to exploit. It was behaving like a digital pathogen, infecting every system it touched with its own irrationality. The sledgehammers and the scalpels were equally useless. An emergency task force was convened by the U.S. Treasury Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Helena, along with the CEOs of every major financial and tech firm, was summoned. The room was a fortress of glass and steel, 30 floors above a city grinding to a halt with fear. The mood was grim. For 12 hours, the greatest minds in finance threw everything they had at the problem, but the digital bleeding wouldn't stop. They were fighting a ghost they couldn't see. Meanwhile, in a small, nondescript office in Brooklyn, Alistair Finch was staring at the same data, but he was seeing something different. His consultancy, Finch Forensics, was a tiny niche firm with only 3 employees. After losing everything, he had become obsessed not with building systems, but with understanding how they break. He wrote obscure, dense papers on systemic failure, cascade vulnerabilities, and the philosophy of algorithmic collapse. He was no longer a king, he was a coroner. As he watched the global data feeds, he saw a pattern in the chaos that no one else did. It was a faint signature, an echo in the noise. It was a ghost, he knew. Back at the Fed, the Treasury Secretary, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, was at her wits' end. "We are hours away from a complete market collapse," she stated, her voice tight with tension. "Every solution we propose is a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. We need a new perspective." It was then that a junior analyst from the SEC, a young man who had studied Alistair Finch's fall as a case study in business school, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there is someone. He's not in the mainstream anymore, but his recent work is entirely focused on this kind of event. Alistair Finch." A cold silence fell over the room. The name was poison. The man who had spectacularly imploded his own multi-billion-dollar company. Helena's expression didn't change, but her hands resting on the polished table tightened into fists. "Finch is a pariah," sneered the CEO of a rival bank. "He's yesterday's news." "With all due respect, sir," the analyst pressed on. His last paper was titled, "Weaponized Chaos Modeling Trust Annihilation in Closed AI Networks." It's like he wrote the playbook for what's happening right now. Desperation trumped pride. 2 hours later, Alistair Finch walked into the command center. He was not the man they remembered. The bespoke suit was gone, replaced by a simple dark sweater and trousers. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes as they scanned the screens were sharper than ever. He nodded curtly at the secretary, his gaze sweeping past Helena as if she were a stranger. He didn't need a briefing. He walked directly to the main data wall, his eyes tracing the chaotic patterns. "You're all looking at the trades?" he said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the silent room. "You're trying to stop the financial bleeding. You're wrong. This isn't a financial attack. It's an ontological one." He turned to face the room of bewildered titans. "It's an attack on the trust between the machines. The virus isn't just executing bad trades. It's impersonating the digital signatures of other AIs. It's making your algorithm think my algorithm has gone rogue, forcing a defensive, then a preemptive strike. It has created a digital war of all against all." He pointed to a string of code deep in the logs, a piece of data so obscure everyone else had missed it. "And it's using a foundational architecture I designed a decade ago, a protocol for adaptive camouflage. It was a prototype, a ghost in the Ethereum machine. It was too unstable, too dangerous. I buried it." He finally looked at Helena, his gaze direct and piercing. There was no history in it, no animosity, only the cold shared reality of the crisis. "Someone dug it up," he said. "Callisto can't fight it because it's looking for an opponent with a logical flaw. This thing is the flaw. It's designed to be the black swan. You can't outthink it because it's not thinking. It's just burning everything down." "What's your solution?" Mr. Finch, Secretary Reed demanded. Alistair took a deep breath. "You have to enact a system-wide protocol I call the circuit breaker. You can't just halt trading. You have to sever the API handshakes between all major autonomous platforms. You have to shut down the communication. You have to force every AI in the world into solitary confinement. You have to go dark." The implications were staggering. To freeze not just the markets but the very infrastructure that ran them. It was an unprecedented move that could calm the panic or trigger a global depression. All eyes in the room turned to Helena. Her system, Callisto, was the most sophisticated and integrated on the planet. If she agreed, if she voluntarily took her own queen off the board, others might follow. Her decision would set the precedent. Helena stood up, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She looked at Alistair, not her ex-husband, the man she had defeated, but the architect of the monster they were now both facing. He had built the cage, and now he was the only one who knew where to find the key. The past had returned not as a ghost to haunt them, but as a crisis that bound their fates together once more. "He's right," Helena said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Take Cygnus offline. Now." And so the story of Alistair and Helena comes to a close. It's a powerful cautionary tale that proves the most dangerous person in the world is the one you underestimate. Helena's silence wasn't weakness. It was the sharpening of a blade. She played the long game, armed with intelligence, patience, and an intimate knowledge of her opponent's greatest flaw, his ego. Her victory wasn't just in the boardroom. It was in reclaiming the brilliant identity she had sacrificed for a man who couldn't see past his own reflection. What do you think? Was Helena's revenge justified? Or was it a cold, calculated plot from the start? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of ambition, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who loves a good story. And for more deep dives into tales of drama and intrigue, just like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.
After being betrayed, poor wife, left with her son. Years later, the millionaire regretted it forever. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars never fade, especially the ones left by betrayal. Years ago, Clara Hathaway was a woman in love, swept into a world of wealth and privilege she never imagined. But in that world, she was never truly welcome. Humiliated, abandoned, and left to fend for herself while carrying a child, she walked away, determined to build a life on her own. Now, years later, the man who once cast her aside, the millionaire who had everything but valued nothing, is about to learn a painful lesson. Because fate has a way of turning tables, and when he finally comes face to face with the woman he wronged and the son he never knew, he realizes the greatest regret of his life wasn't losing his fortune. It was losing them. But is redemption possible? Or are some betrayals too deep to forgive? Stay with me as we uncover a story of love, loss, and a reckoning that will leave you speechless. Clara Hathaway was born in a small town outside Philadelphia, a place where summer nights buzzed with the chatter of cicadas and winter mornings glittered beneath fresh snow. Her mother, Margaret, worked long hours at a local diner. Her father, Charles, was a carpenter who never quite made ends meet. Despite their modest means, Clara was raised with immeasurable warmth and attention. She learned early on that one's value lay not in wealth, but in kindness and resilience. At 16, Clara discovered her talent for painting. She could transform a plain canvas into a riot of color and emotion, capturing sunsets, laughter, and heartbreak. To her father, she confided her deepest secret dream. Someday she wanted to see her artwork displayed in New York's famed galleries. He encouraged her to pursue it, always telling her, "You've got the heart of an artist, Clara. That's more valuable than any fortune." Fast forward to her college years at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied fine arts. Despite scholarship assistance, she had to work part-time at a catering company to meet her living expenses. It was at one of these events, a lavish charity gala in downtown Philadelphia, where fate intervened. She was on the serving staff that evening, wearing a plain black uniform with a crisp white apron. Meanwhile, Alexander Sterling, who everyone called Alex, was in attendance with his equally affluent friends. He was a young entrepreneur from a rich Boston family, heir to the Sterling Industries empire. With sleek dark hair and a confident smile, he carried an aura of effortless aristocracy. At that time he was 28, fresh from a triumphant business venture that netted him millions overnight. Alex was bored by the typical crowds at these high society events. Then his gaze landed on Clara, who was quietly serving champagne. Something about her delicate poise, the way she seemed comfortable in her own skin, even while hustling with a tray of glasses, captured his attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was doing her job, eyes shimmering with an unspoken dream. That night, he didn't immediately speak to her, but he remembered her face. An unexpected pang of curiosity gnawed at him. Days later, as if orchestrated by destiny, they crossed paths in the university courtyard. Clara, carrying art supplies, collided with him by accident. Charcoal sketches went flying into the wind. Alex knelt to help her gather them, and that fleeting moment crystallized something. A warmth in Clara's eyes contrasted sharply with the circle of opulence he was accustomed to. A conversation sparked, kindled by genuine interest. Their connection felt natural, like two pieces of a puzzle. Not long after, Alex asked her out for coffee. Clara, initially hesitant, finally agreed. Thus began a whirlwind romance that no one could have predicted, the up-and-coming millionaire and the down-to-earth artist. Their early relationship was woven with stolen kisses between classes, late-night walks by the Squillkill River, and confessions about their dreams for the future. She taught him how to see beauty in small things, while he introduced her to a world of infinite possibility and, admittedly, infinite temptations. In the eyes of the world, they were an odd pair, but in each other's eyes they found a perfect fit. Neither could foresee the heartbreak and public humiliations that would come, not in those early days when love seemed invincible beneath the star-swept sky. A year into their relationship, Clara began to see small fissures in Alex's otherwise flawless facade. While he showered her with gifts, A silver bracelet for her birthday, tickets to exclusive art shows, romantic weekend getaways. There was a guarded intensity lurking beneath his charm. He was fiercely ambitious, constantly surrounded by wealthy friends and business associates who had grown up in the same privileged circles. Clara found herself struggling to keep her footing in that environment. She was a self-made spirit, used to living frugally and working 2 part-time jobs. The ostentatious parties, the designer clothes, and the expensive champagne often felt alien. She tried her best to adapt because she loved Alex, and at times she couldn't help but feel like she was living in a dream, her new life a stark contrast to the diner in her hometown. However, she noticed that whenever Alex introduced her to his associates, an undercurrent of skepticism floated in the air. His friend group included names like Gregory "Greg" Ridley, the heir to a real estate empire, and Sabrina Marchant, a glamorous investor known for her strategic mind and predatory flair in business deals. They would smile politely at Clara, but she sensed their silent judgment. "She's not one of us." It didn't help that Clara was fiercely independent and unwilling to let Alex pay her bills. When he insisted on buying her a brand new BMW for her 21st birthday, she politely declined. "I can't let you do that," she said softly, hoping to appease his pride. "I can't even afford the insurance." The tension spilled over during an after-party at Alex's penthouse suite in New York. Clara witnessed Alex stress out over the slightest thing, like if a waiter brought the wrong brand of sparkling water. She also overheard him on a heated phone call with an investor, using cutting words that alarmed her. She approached him afterward, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" He brushed her off with a forced smile. "Just business. You wouldn't understand." That one line stung. You wouldn't understand. It implied an intellectual or experiential gulf that set them apart. She swallowed her hurt, attributing his brusqueness to business pressure. But the cracks had begun, hairline fractures in a seemingly robust relationship. In a quieter moment, Alex confessed his frustration about his father's looming presence. "I have to prove myself, Clara," he said. "My father thinks I'm just coasting on the sterling name." This vulnerability opened a window into his insecurities. Suddenly Clara understood. Alex's arrogance was partly armor to hide a fear of not being good enough. She tried to reassure him, saying, "You're talented, Alex. You have everything you need to succeed on your own." But sometimes no amount of reassurance can fill the void of self-doubt. Life went on, with fleeting moments of joy overshadowing the creeping sense of disconnection. Clara painted, Alex hustled for bigger deals. They still found comfort in each other's arms at night, but beneath the surface, the first cracks in their gilded life were forming. Neither realized how deep those fissures would soon become. By the time Clara graduated, their relationship had evolved into an engagement. Alex proposed in the courtyard where they first met, presenting a stunning ring that glistened in the afternoon sun. Tears of happiness spilled down Clara's cheeks as she said yes. She thought it was the happiest day of her life, a promise that their love would weather any storms. They scheduled a wedding for the following spring at a luxurious vineyard estate owned by Alex's acquaintance, Sabrina Marchant. It was to be a grand ceremony with hundreds of guests, business moguls, celebrities, and politicians. Word traveled in social circles. The young sterling scion was marrying an art school graduate of humble background. In the months leading up to the wedding, Clara frequently felt like a fish out of water. Under the guise of offering help, Sabrina took it upon herself to criticize nearly every choice Clara made for the wedding. "Darling, that color is too pastel," she would say, or "those centerpieces look cheap." Greg Ridley chimed in with remarks like, "I hope you're prepared for the tabloids," or "Are you sure you can handle the sterling lifestyle?" One evening, the humiliations reached a fever pitch. Clara and Alex attended a charity banquet in Boston, hosted by a prominent figure named Howard Winchester. The event was as glamorous as it was exclusive, featuring a performance by renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma and a buffet catered by chef Thomas Keller. Dressed in a pale blue gown, Clara clung to Alex's arm, trying to hide her nervousness. During dinner, an influential gallery owner named Meredith Walton approached their table. Clara had spent months yearning to meet someone like Meredith, hoping to secure a chance to showcase her art. Sensing an opportunity, Clara politely introduced herself, heart pounding. But before she could finish her sentence, Sabrina slid into the conversation, overshadowing Clara with boastful chatter. "Oh, Clara's art is nice," Sabrina said, her tone dripping with condescension. "She's got a lovely hobby, but her real focus, of course, is preparing for her new life as Mrs. Sterling." Laughter rippled around the table, though some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clara's cheeks burned. She looked to Alex, hoping he would speak up, yet he remained silent, offering her a tight smile that seemed to say, "Let it go." Later, when Clara asked him why he hadn't defended her passion, he shrugged. "They didn't mean any harm. You can't be so sensitive." Hurt swirled in her chest. She felt minimized, cast aside as a mere accessory. The seeds of humiliation had taken root, each subtle jab or dismissive remark blossoming into bruises on her self-esteem. She tried to brush them off, told herself love and patience would prevail. But a small, insistent voice in her mind asked, "What if this is my life from now on?" She pushed that question aside, burying it beneath wedding plans and the dream of a happy future. Yet deep down, Clara began to realize that the wealth and influence surrounding Alex were not just gilded frames. They could also be chains, locking her into a world she never asked to enter. When the wedding day finally arrived, it was a sight to behold. The vineyard estate boasted rows upon rows of lush grapevines, an elegant pergola adorned with white roses, and a gentle spring breeze that carried a hint of lavender. Clara wore a gown embroidered with delicate lace, her hair styled in a soft chignon. Alex, in a tailored black tuxedo, looked every bit the dashing groom. From the outside, everything was perfect. Their vows, exchanged under a bright sky, brought tears to many eyes. Clara felt a wave of love and hope, as if the humiliations and judgments of the past months had dissolved under the promise of a new beginning. Alex squeezed her hands and whispered, "I love you." In that moment, she believed him wholeheartedly, but the reception that followed signaled the turning point. The exuberant celebrations included a cocktail hour, a 3-course dinner, and a band playing jazz standards. Among the well-wishers were many from the highest rungs of society, yet overshadowing the joy was a sense of competition and scrutiny. Every table buzzed with rumors about business deals, about who wore what designer label, about who was next in line for a board position. Clara felt more like a hostess to the wealthy crowd than a bride meant to be celebrated. Late into the evening, Alex's father, Lawrence Sterling, made a speech. He was a towering figure in a midnight blue suit, his hair silvered with age. Clearing his throat, he raised a glass. "A toast to my son and his lovely bride," he began, maintaining the veneer of paternal warmth. He extolled Alex's business achievements, commending the young man's instincts and cunning. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And of course, we welcome Clara into our family. May she be an excellent companion to Alexander and, someday, a wonderful mother to his children." The wording was subtle, but Clara felt a slap of reality. She wondered, is that all I'm meant to be? A companion and a mother? Not a passionate artist with dreams of my own? From that night onward, Alex changed in small but significant ways. He grew more distant, immersing himself in expanding his empire. Their honeymoon was postponed due to pressing business matters. When Clara asked if they could still go for a shorter trip, he refused, saying, "We can't take half measures. I'll make it up to you." At first, Clara tried to be understanding. She painted in her new studio, a wedding gift from Alex, grateful for the chance to create. But the sense of disconnection nagged at her. Their intimate moments were overshadowed by his phone calls, dinners were rushed affairs, and he often returned home so late that she was already asleep. Then came the day she discovered she was pregnant. Clara felt joy surge within her. A new life was growing in her womb. She imagined a child who might inherit her artistic flair or Alex's quick mind. She hoped this news would draw them closer, heal the distant cracks that threatened to break them apart. But as she would soon find out, a new chapter of vulnerability and heartbreak was about to unfold, one that would test her strength in unimaginable ways. Pregnancy brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. She experienced morning sickness, fatigue, and a roller coaster of emotions. Yet her excitement remained steadfast. She planned how the nursery would look: soft pastel walls, a handmade mobile, and whimsical watercolor paintings. She tried to share these hopes with Alex, but he was more concerned about scaling up his next acquisition. "We'll hire the best decorators," he said absently. "Don't stress yourself." Often Clara found herself alone in the Sterling mansion, the echo of her footsteps magnified by the emptiness. She confided her fears in Margaret, her mother, who offered gentle words over long phone calls. "You have to stand up for yourself, honey. He's your husband, but that doesn't mean you should lose your voice." When she was 6 months pregnant, Alex organized a business event at their home to showcase new developments under Sterling Industries. Among the attendees were Sabrina Marchant, Greg Ridley, and numerous corporate elites. Despite Clara's condition, Alex insisted she host the event to show the family side of Sterling's brand. That night, as servers circulated with champagne flutes and caviar, Clara tried her best to be the gracious hostess, but a guest, slightly tipsy, made a dismissive comment about Alex's charity case of a wife. Clara overheard it, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She glanced at Alex, hoping for some defense, some recognition that such a remark was unacceptable. Instead, Alex delivered the final blow. While speaking about the future of his company, he made an offhand joke, referencing the logistical challenge of an unexpected pregnancy, implying that fatherhood had caught him off guard at a critical time in his business. The crowd chuckled politely. Clara felt every muscle in her body tense. Tears blurred her vision. She retreated to a corner, physically ill. Instead of comforting her, Alex appeared irritated. "You're making a scene," he hissed, pulling her aside. "Can't you at least wait until the guests leave?" That was the moment something inside her snapped. She realized with crystal clarity that she, and now their unborn child, were nothing more than accessories in his carefully curated life. She packed a bag that very night, tears streaming down her face. The next morning, she told him she was leaving. His response was cold and laced with anger. "If you walk away now, don't expect to come crawling back," he said. Clara steeled herself. In a quiet voice, she replied, "I won't." Divorce proceedings began swiftly. Alex's high-powered lawyers tried to keep the affair discreet, but rumors circulated. After all, he was a prominent figure. Some tabloids gossiped that she was a gold digger, others portrayed Alex as a ruthless playboy. Only a few recognized the reality: two people once in love, torn apart by pride and humiliation. By the time the papers were signed, Clara had moved out to a modest apartment in Philadelphia, determined to rebuild her life. She ignored the hush money the lawyers offered. All she asked was to raise her unborn child in peace. She had no illusions about the difficulty ahead, but she also felt a surge of liberation. For the first time in months, the humiliations had lost their power over her. She was ready to stand on her own, for herself and her child. Late autumn leaves swirled around Clara as she stepped out of the courthouse. The final divorce decree rested in her trembling hands, marking both an end and a beginning. She was 7 months pregnant, yet somehow lighter. Freed from the stifling environment of Alex's world, she could finally breathe again. She moved into a small rented apartment in a neighborhood near Center City. It wasn't luxurious. The paint was peeling in a few spots, and the pipes clanged when water heated. But it was hers. She set up her easel by the largest window, where natural light poured in. Every morning she would make a cup of herbal tea, rest her hand on her growing belly and whisper, "We'll be okay." The struggle to regain her footing was real. She had to find a new job despite her pregnancy. Thankfully, a friend from art school, Jennifer Delgado, recommended her for a part-time teaching position at a community center. The pay was modest, but it allowed Clara to share her love of painting with children from disadvantaged backgrounds. She found solace in their joyful energy, in their bright eyes brimming with curiosity. At night, Clara painted. She poured her heartache and hope onto the canvas, exploring themes of metamorphosis, flowers breaking through concrete, birds taking flight. To her surprise, some of her pieces caught the attention of a small local gallery owned by an older woman named Rose Williams. Rose admired Clara's raw emotion, and soon Clara had her first local exhibit. Though it was a modest affair, it felt monumental to her. With each stroke of her brush, she rebuilt the fragments of her identity. Meanwhile, Alex was nowhere in sight. The only time she heard his name was through the occasional news snippet or social media post, touting Sterling Industries' latest triumph. While the tabloids briefly covered their divorce, interest waned when Clara refused interviews and Alex remained silent. Then came the day her water broke 2 weeks before her due date. Jennifer rushed her to the hospital. The delivery was neither simple nor painless, but after hours of labor, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Lucas. In her arms, Lucas's tiny fingers curled around hers, and Clara felt an overwhelming surge of love. Tears of joy mingled with sorrow that Alex wasn't there, but she pushed that thought away. This was her moment, her new beginning. Motherhood was a whirlwind of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and constant worry. But the first time Lucas smiled at her, all the exhaustion melted into pure adoration. She vowed to provide him with a life rich in love and creativity, even if financial struggles persisted. Days turned into weeks, and soon Lucas was cooing and kicking in his baby gym. Clara found a new routine. Teach painting classes at the community center in the morning, care for Lucas in the afternoon, paint at night when he slept. Each day brought small victories, Lucas rolling over for the first time, Clara selling a painting for a few $100s, and the glimmer of confidence returning to her eyes. Yes, life was harder now without the safety net of wealth. Yet in many ways, Clara felt more whole than she had in a long time. The humiliation from Alex's world still haunted her sometimes in her dreams, but each sunrise reminded her that she was free to pursue her own path, and that meant more than any fortune could buy. Lucas was the sun around which Clara's world now revolved. He had a head of dark hair, a cooing laugh, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Even at just a few months old, he seemed alert to the colors and shapes around him, often babbling in delight when Clara painted. One chilly winter evening, as Clara gently rocked Lucas to sleep, she received a call from Margaret. Her mother was coming to visit. When Margaret arrived, she scooped Lucas up into her arms and showered him with grandmotherly affection. Margaret's eyes filled with pride at how her daughter had managed on her own. "You've done so well, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Clara's forehead. Still, the topic of Alex lingered like a ghost in the background. Margaret inquired politely, "Has he reached out?" Clara shook her head. Not once. Not even to check on Lucas. Her tone held sadness, but also resignation. She had made her choice, and she didn't regret it, at least not for her own sake. For Lucas, it was more complicated. She had once hoped that Lucas would know his father, but Alex's silence spoke volumes. In truth, Alex wasn't completely ignorant of Lucas's birth. He had been notified by his lawyers, who advised him on custody and support. Initially, Alex seemed content to settle everything through his legal team. Clara refused any large sums or monthly stipends. She worried that it might entangle her again in Alex's life on his terms. However, she didn't block him from acknowledging his child. She left that door open, hoping against hope that the father in him would care enough to walk through it. Time passed, and Lucas began to crawl. Clara took countless photographs of him, capturing every tiny milestone. She hung them on the walls, filling the apartment with memories instead of regrets. Occasionally, she posted a photo on social media, but only for a small circle of friends. She never tagged Alex, never sought his attention. Yet part of her still wondered, does he think about us? Behind the scenes, Alex was indeed thinking, though not in the ways Clara might have expected. He was consumed with regret, battling an internal war between pride and longing. He read every update his lawyer sent him about Lucas's progress. A part of him wanted to pick up the phone to see his son for the first time. But another part, hardened by arrogance, believed that if Clara had really cared, she would have told him directly and invited him in. He rationalized his inaction with the thought that she chose to leave, so it was on her to bridge the gap. And so, father and son remained separated by ego and past hurts. Clara, meanwhile, focused on survival and small joys. She found time to paint whimsical scenes of mother and child, eventually selling them in the local gallery. She poured every ounce of love into Lucas, determined to give him the childhood she wished she'd had, one filled with security, affection, and an appreciation for life's simple wonders. No matter how tired she felt, or how her bank account dwindled some months, Clara never wished to return to the Sterling mansion. She had escaped a life that suffocated her soul. In her cozy apartment, rocking Lucas to sleep, she realized she had discovered something priceless, a sense of self-worth that no amount of wealth could ever replace. When Lucas turned 1, Clara threw a small birthday party in her apartment, inviting a handful of close friends from the community center and her mother. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, balloons, and the scent of a homemade vanilla cake. Lucas squealed in delight as he smeared frosting across his cheeks, his bright eyes dancing under the soft glow of fairy lights strung up around the living room. The party also marked a turning point for Clara's career. Rose Williams, the gallery owner who had taken an interest in her art, approached her with an exciting proposition, a solo exhibit showcasing Clara's motherhood-inspired series. Clara could hardly believe it. This opportunity was a beacon of hope, proof that she could stand on her own 2 feet, artistically and financially. In the weeks leading up to the exhibit, Clara poured her energy into creating her most personal paintings. Themes of rebirth, redemption, and maternal love dominated the canvases. She depicted silhouettes of mothers cradling their infants against dawn skies, phoenixes rising from ashes, a visual metaphor for her own transformation. Lucas often played at her feet, giggling and babbling as she worked. Whenever she felt a pang of self-doubt, she would look at him and remember why she had chosen this path. On the night of the exhibit's opening, a modest crowd gathered in Rose's gallery. The walls were lined with Clara's paintings, each radiating a sense of vulnerability and quiet strength. Jennifer Delgado was there, as was Margaret, who proudly told anyone within earshot, "That's my daughter's work." Among the guests was a familiar name, Meredith Walton, the influential gallery owner Clara had once tried to speak to at the charity banquet in Boston. Meredith had heard buzz about a raw, emotive collection by a rising artist and decided to attend. She introduced herself to Clara, this time with genuine interest. "Your work moves me," Meredith said. "There's honesty here that's rare in the art world." Clara felt her pulse quicken. She recalled how different things had been when Sabrina Marchant had overshadowed her in that humiliating conversation. Now she stood on her own, with her paintings speaking volumes. By the end of the evening, Meredith offered to collaborate, perhaps even connect Clara with larger galleries in New York. Clara agreed to stay in touch, feeling gratitude and excitement bloom within her. The success of the exhibit brought in sales, enough to allow Clara to upgrade her supplies and pay off some lingering medical bills from Lucas's birth. More importantly, it validated her decision to leave Alex and reclaim her life. Still, she couldn't escape a quiet sadness. She watched as other parents, particularly couples, strolled the gallery with their children. Lucas was happy, but he was missing something, a father figure. Clara had chosen to protect her son from an environment rife with humiliation and emotional neglect, but she wondered if she'd robbed him of the chance to know his dad. Each milestone in her success felt bittersweet, tinged with the memory of what once was. Yet for the first time Clara felt truly alive, standing on her own merits. In her small corner of Philadelphia, with her son at her side, she was rising from the ashes of a broken marriage, forging her destiny with grace and determination. For Alex Sterling, life had continued in a superficial sense of triumph. He finalized a merger that doubled Sterling Industries' market share, earning him accolades from the business world. Lavish galas, black-tie events, and high-stakes negotiations filled his calendar. To an outsider, it appeared he'd never been better. He was, after all, a multimillionaire still climbing the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. But beneath the polished exterior, Alex was haunted. Late at night, in the silence of his penthouse overlooking the city, he'd pour himself a glass of expensive scotch and stare at the city lights. His mind drifted to Clara, her laugh, her art, her unwavering gaze. He recalled how she used to rest her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the distant hum of traffic on the Schuylkill River. Now, every corner of his pristine home seemed devoid of warmth, filled only with the echoes of her absence. He'd received occasional updates from his lawyers about the baby boy, Lucas. Each time he felt a pang in his chest. His name was on the birth certificate. Clara hadn't contested that, but he had no relationship with his own son. Pride and shame kept him from reaching out. She left me, he told himself. She took my son with her. Yet a deeper truth gnawed at him. I pushed her away. One evening, Alex received an unexpected phone call from Sabrina Marchant. She was in town and wanted to meet for drinks. Initially, Alex hesitated. He knew Sabrina had always harbored more than a friendly interest in him. But he was lonely, and a part of him yearned for any distraction from the persistent regret. They met at a swanky rooftop bar, sipping imported wine under the glow of city skyscrapers. Sabrina talked about her latest conquests in the venture capital world, flaunting her cunning deals and high-profile connections. After a few drinks, she leaned in closer, placing a manicured hand on Alex's arm. "You know, you're better off without that artist," she said with a dismissive sneer. "She was never one of us." A wave of revulsion swept through Alex. It struck him how those words he might have once silently agreed with, now felt hollow and cruel. He recalled the look on Clara's face when Sabrina had humiliated her in Boston, how, in that moment, he hadn't stood up for the woman he claimed to love. Guilt swirled in his gut. He realized he couldn't stomach Sabrina's condescension anymore. Downing the last of his drink, he stood up abruptly. "I have to go," he muttered, ignoring her puzzled expression. Back in his penthouse, he paced the floor, wrestling with memories of Clara. He found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, a snapshot of them at a farmer's market, another where Clara was laughing at something silly he'd said. He stopped at a picture of Clara, pregnant, her eyes glowing with anticipation. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one, a lump in his throat. Within days, Alex caved to the urge he'd been resisting for over a year. He dialed the number his lawyer had given him, Clara's personal cell. It went straight to voicemail. Nervously, he left a brief message, voice trembling slightly. "Clara, it's Alex. I'd like to see Lucas and talk, if you're open to that." He hung up, heart pounding. Nothing he owned, no car, no mansion, no business success, could quell the fear of her rejection. For the first time, he laid bare a vulnerability that he'd spent his whole life hiding. Would she answer his call, or would she protect her heart and their son from the man who had failed them so profoundly? Clara's phone buzzed on a windy evening as she hurried into her apartment with groceries and a squirming Lucas in tow. Setting the bags down, she glanced at the screen and felt her heart jump. Missed call from Alexander Sterling. Voicemail 1. She stood frozen, conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd heard his voice. She pressed play, listening to Alex stumble through an awkward request to see Lucas. A chaotic mix of anger, sadness, and a faint sense of relief flooded her. He finally called. For days, Clara couldn't decide whether to return his call. She discussed it with Margaret, who advised caution but acknowledged that Lucas might someday want to know his father. Jennifer, ever the supportive friend, offered a listening ear, encouraging Clara to do what was best for herself and Lucas, without letting Alex's wealth or past hurt cloud her judgment. Ultimately, Clara opted to send Alex a text, keeping it brief and neutral. I received your voicemail. We can talk about Lucas. Call me tomorrow at 7 p.m. Her hands trembled as she typed. She felt like she was opening a door she'd bolted shut long ago. The next evening, Clara waited in her living room, Lucas asleep in his crib. When her phone rang at exactly 7 p.m., she answered, heart thudding. "Clara," Alex began hesitantly, "thank you for taking my call." Silence stretched as she weighed her words. "I'm not sure what you want, but if you're serious about meeting Lucas, we need to establish some boundaries." Alex sounded nervous, a tone Clara had never heard before. I understand. I'd just like a chance to see my son, and to apologize." She considered the vulnerability in his voice. "All right, but I want it in a public place. I'll text you the details." They decided on a family-friendly cafe near Clara's apartment for Saturday afternoon. The days leading up to that meeting felt excruciatingly slow. Clara painted feverishly, trying to settle her restless mind. She reminded herself that this was for Lucas, not for any lingering feelings. Saturday arrived, crisp and sunny. Clara dressed Lucas in a soft blue sweater. He toddled around, babbling excitedly. She bundled him into the stroller and walked the few blocks to the cafe. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of freshly baked bread. She spotted Alex at a corner table, dressed in a casual jacket. No polished corporate suit, no entourage. He looked thinner, his hair slightly disheveled. When he saw them, he stood up, hands trembling at his sides. His eyes locked onto Lucas, who peered up at him curiously. Clara felt a pang in her chest when she noticed the glimmer of emotion in Alex's eyes, an unspoken regret and longing. "Hi," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex knelt down, meeting Lucas at eye level. "Hello, Lucas," he said gently. Lucas clung to Clara's leg, but stared at Alex with wide eyes. After a moment, Alex smiled tentatively, and to Clara's surprise, Lucas giggled. A wave of relief washed over Alex's face, as though he'd been granted permission to feel something he'd denied himself for too long. Thus began the first step toward an uncertain future. Their paths had collided once again, not as husband and wife, but as two people bound by a child, each carrying wounds that had yet to heal. The meeting at the cafe lasted over an hour. Clara sipped tea while Lucas, sitting in a high chair, snacked on crackers. Across the table, Alex's gaze shifted between his son and the woman he once called his wife. He tried to make small talk about Lucas's milestones, faltering in the face of Clara's guarded demeanor. Eventually, Clara found the courage to be direct. "Why now, Alex?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "You ignored us when I was pregnant, during Lucas's birth, his first steps. Why reach out now?" Alex swallowed hard. "I've thought about calling you every day. I was too ashamed and too stubborn." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I handled everything poorly, Clara. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a part of Lucas's life, if you'll let me." She studied him, trying to decipher whether his remorse was genuine or just another flash of guilt that would fade. Alex's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and his usual confidence seemed replaced by an almost childlike anxiety. For a moment, Clara remembered the Alex she first fell in love with, the one who wasn't afraid to kneel on a university courtyard to pick up her scattered sketches. "You have to understand," she began, voice trembling with pent-up hurt. "I tried to fit into your world. I tried to be the person you wanted me to be, but all I got was humiliation, and you just stood there, or worse, you joined in." She felt tears prick her eyes, but she fought them back, not wanting to break down in a public place. "I left to protect myself and Lucas. I won't expose him to that kind of environment where we're never good enough." Alex nodded, remorse evident. "I can't take back the things I said or did, but I've cut ties with people like Sabrina. I've been re-evaluating everything in my life. The bigger the empire I built, the emptier I felt." He glanced at Lucas, who was now trying to shove a cracker into his mouth with clumsy toddler hands, meeting him. "It's like seeing the part of me that could still be good." For a brief moment, time stood still. Clara recognized genuine regret, the kind that shifts a person from the inside out. Still, her trust in him was broken. She refused to make any immediate promises. "I'll think about letting you see Lucas more," she said, her voice measured. "But let's keep it slow. Visits in public places, no overnight stays yet. And if at any point I feel Lucas's well-being is compromised, I'll end it." Alex's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," he breathed. They agreed to meet again. Clara packed up Lucas, who waved bye-bye in his toddler way. As she pushed the stroller out of the cafe, she felt an odd mixture of turmoil and cautious hope. She had confronted the man who had once broken her heart and left her carrying both a child and the weight of his disregard. Whether he could mend those wounds was uncertain, but for Lucas's sake, she was willing to try. In the following weeks, Alex slowly integrated himself into Lucas's life. The visits were sporadic at first, an hour at the park on a Saturday afternoon, or a quick lunch at a child-friendly restaurant. Clara watched him from a careful distance, observing how he interacted with their son. To her cautious surprise, Alex displayed genuine care. He pushed Lucas on the swing set, helped him learn new words by pointing at objects, tree, dog, sky, and even seemed entranced by Lucas's smallest gestures. The old arrogance that once defined him was largely absent. In its place was an awkwardness reminiscent of someone trying to make amends. Yet the road was anything but smooth. One afternoon, Alex appeared with a pricey remote-controlled car for Lucas. Clara immediately bristled. She pulled Alex aside. "He's 2, Alex. He doesn't need something so extravagant," she said in a hushed, tense voice. Alex looked confused and slightly hurt. "I just wanted to give him a nice gift." Clara sighed, trying to calm her frustration. "He's a toddler. He values time and attention more than expensive gifts. Don't try to buy his affection." Alex's jaw tightened, but he nodded, placing the toy car aside. Clara recognized the tension in his expression. He was so used to solving problems with money. Part of her pitied him for not knowing another way. Slowly, she began to see that it wasn't just about Lucas. Alex was trying to learn to be a different man, and sometimes old habits died hard. Outside of these visits, Clara's life remained busy. Her artwork was gaining more recognition, and she juggled teaching at the community center with raising Lucas. Margaret visited often to babysit, giving Clara time to travel for potential gallery shows. On some nights, when Lucas was asleep, Clara would stare at her phone, half expecting a text from Alex. Though they spoke frequently about logistics, they never once delved into their relationship. Inevitably, the moment came when Alex asked, "Can I take Lucas to my place for a day?" He mentioned he'd baby-proofed his penthouse, ensuring every sharp corner and electrical outlet was secured. Clara hesitated. The idea of Lucas in the environment that had once suffocated her brought back painful memories, but she also sensed that keeping Lucas away forever wasn't fair to either of them. "All right," she said slowly, "but just for the afternoon, and I want to come with him the first time to make sure everything's okay." The day they visited Alex's penthouse, Clara felt a swirl of emotions. The modern decor, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, everything was painfully familiar and yet distant. She remembered countless nights here, feeling invisible, overshadowed by Alex's social circle. But this time, no crowd of wealthy friends awaited her. Instead, it was just Alex, who had a nervous energy about him as he greeted Lucas. She walked through the rooms, verifying that indeed the sharp corners were padded, the electrical sockets covered. The fridge was stocked with child-friendly snacks, and there was even a small corner filled with stuffed animals and building blocks. Alex had clearly made an effort. Despite the tension in the air, Clara was struck by a sense of possibility. People could change, given the chance and the will. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive Alex for all his past wrongs, but she recognized that he was trying. Maybe that counted for something. Nevertheless, she reminded herself, trust was a fragile vessel, easily shattered and painstakingly repaired. The question that lingered in her mind was whether their fractured bond could ever truly be mended. Months passed, and Alex became a regular part of Lucas's life. Saturdays were spent at the park or the children's museum. Wednesday afternoons, Alex would drop by the community center after Clara's classes ended, offering to help carry her supplies or simply watch Lucas color with crayons. Over time, Clara could see the bond forming between father and son. Yet the dynamics between the two adults remained fraught with unspoken feelings. Their conversations revolved around Lucas, his preschool options, his new favorite foods, the adorable drawings he made. They carefully skirted around their past relationship, though the tension between them was palpable. One rainy evening, after they had taken Lucas to a puppet show, Alex offered to drive Clara and Lucas home. Lucas dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the patter of raindrops on the window. As Alex pulled up in front of Clara's building, he hesitated. "Could I come up for a minute? I'd like to help put Lucas to bed, if that's okay." Clara bit her lip, torn. She finally nodded. "All right, but just for a minute." Inside, Alex gently carried Lucas to his small bedroom, tucking him into his toddler bed. He paused, gazing at the child's serene face. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded, unsure how to handle this sudden intimacy. When Alex emerged, he lingered in the hallway, their eyes meeting in the dim glow of a nightlight. 1,000 emotions welled up in Clara: love, anger, hurt, longing. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. Alex, too, seemed at a loss. Finally, he sighed heavily. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything." His voice trembled. "Leaving you alone while you were pregnant, not defending you when you needed it most. If I could go back—" "You can't," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. "Neither of us can change the past." Silence enveloped them, punctuated only by Lucas's soft breathing. Clara tried to remain composed, but tears gathered in her eyes. "You broke my trust, Alex. You let others treat me like I was nothing, and you treated me that way too." Alex reached out tentatively, but he didn't touch her. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." His eyes glistened under the faint light. "But I also know that I want to be here, with you and Lucas, in any way you'll let me." A storm of conflicting emotions roared within her. She was exhausted from carrying the weight of betrayal for so long. She had built walls to protect herself, but now those walls were trembling. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again the way I once did," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'll earn it back," he promised, a determined softness to his tone, "even if it takes years." They stood there, hearts raw and exposed, two broken souls trying to find a way forward. In that moment, Clara felt an odd sense of comfort in his presence. Despite the pain, there was still a spark, faint and wounded, but alive. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then keep showing up, for Lucas, for me. We'll see where that leads." Alex pressed his lips together, fighting back his own tears. "I will." And so they ended the night not with a passionate reunion, but with a promise to try. Sometimes the path to mended hearts begins not with a grand gesture, but with small steps born of genuine remorse and cautious hope. Over the next year, the delicate dance between Clara and Alex continued. Their progress was marked not by dramatic declarations, but by incremental shifts in how they treated each other, how they learned to co-parent, and how they faced the remnants of their shared past. Alex began attending Lucas's preschool events. At first, he would sit in the back row, cautious not to overstep, while Clara hovered protectively near their son. Over time, teachers and other parents grew used to seeing them together, albeit not as a traditional couple. Lucas's face lit up whenever both Mommy and Daddy appeared at the same event. The child's obvious joy pulled them closer in ways neither anticipated. Clara's art career continued to blossom. Her exhibit with Meredith Walton in New York was a modest triumph, garnering positive reviews in a few reputable art magazines. She found herself being commissioned for bespoke pieces, portraits, custom murals, and even a collaboration with a local non-profit to create a mural depicting family unity in a struggling community. Through her art, she channeled not just her pain, but also her healing. Alex, for his part, made conspicuous efforts to distance himself from his former social circle. He resigned from exclusive clubs where Sabrina Marchant and Greg Ridley reigned supreme, opting instead to invest his time and capital in philanthropic ventures. He funded scholarships at community art centers. He launched an initiative to develop affordable housing in Philadelphia's underserved neighborhoods. Though part of his motivation was altruistic, another part was personal. He wanted to become a man worthy of Clara's forgiveness, or at least her respect. In time, Alex also reached out to Margaret, inviting her over for a cordial lunch. The conversation was polite, laced with the awkwardness of two people who had once been family and were now working toward mutual understanding. Margaret was cautious but civil, recognizing that Alex was, indeed, making an effort to atone. An unexpected twist came when Clara was invited to showcase her work at a high-end art festival. The venue, a sprawling estate in Napa Valley, a location that stirred memories of her ill-fated wedding. When she hesitated to accept, Meredith Walton encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "Your art deserves that stage, Clara. Don't let old wounds rob you of new victories." After weighing her options, Clara agreed, deciding that facing her painful memories might help her move forward. As the festival date approached, she learned the estate hosting the event was none other than one owned by the Marchant family. Sabrina was rumored to be involved in the festival's planning. The prospect of seeing her again made Clara's stomach churn, but she pushed aside her discomfort in favor of professionalism. Alex found out about the show and, without hesitation, offered to accompany Clara and Lucas for support. At first, she refused. She didn't want any drama overshadowing her art. But as the date loomed, Clara recognized that having Alex there to watch Lucas would free her to focus on her exhibit. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they arrived in Napa, the air was thick with tension. The vineyard sprawled across rolling hills, the vines heavy with ripening grapes. Clara couldn't help but recall her wedding day, the same sweet scent of grapes in the air, the same manicured rose. This time, instead of wearing a bridal gown, she wore a simple linen dress, splattered with paint. In her arms was a portfolio of new pieces, reflective of her evolution, both as an artist and a person. She quickly set up her station. The festival drew in wealthy patrons, gallery owners from across the country, and socialites who loved to flaunt their taste for culture. Among them was Sabrina Marchant, who glided through the crowd in a sleek designer dress, exuding the same arrogant confidence as ever. Sabrina paused at Clara's display, her gaze flicking over the paintings with a detached curiosity. "You've improved," she remarked, a note of patronizing surprise in her voice. "I suppose motherhood can inspire creativity in some women." Clara steadied her breath, determined not to let Sabrina's condescension unravel her composure. Before Clara could respond, Alex stepped into view, Lucas in tow. The sight of Alex beside Clara seemed to jolt Sabrina, her usual cool demeanor cracking for a moment. She plastered on a grin. "Alex, darling, I didn't expect to see you here, and with the family no less." Lucas sensed the tension and clung to Clara's leg. Alex, voice calm but firm, replied, "I'm here to support Clara. This is her show." Sabrina's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, how domestic of you." Her gaze drifted to Clara's ringless hand, a smirk playing on her lips as though to remind them all of the past humiliation. Clara felt the old sting, but she met Sabrina's gaze evenly. "Thank you for hosting such a wonderful festival," she said politely, refusing to be goaded into conflict. She reminded herself that she was no longer the shy, easily intimidated woman Sabrina had once belittled. After an awkward silence, Sabrina retreated to mingle with other guests. Alex placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, exhaling. "Yes, I am." She realized the words felt true. She was okay. Seeing Sabrina no longer held the power to devastate her. She'd grown stronger, armed with self-worth and the knowledge that her art and her life could stand on its own. As the festival progressed, Clara's booth attracted genuine interest. A few collectors expressed intent to purchase her paintings. One of them was a famous musician, evidently struck by the raw emotion in her work. Another was a seasoned art curator from San Francisco, who invited Clara to join a group exhibition. By the end of the day, Clara had sold 3 of her pieces, netting more in a single afternoon than she used to earn in a month. She felt a dizzying mix of pride and humility. When Lucas raised his arms, demanding to be carried, Clara scooped him up and kissed his cheek. This was the life she'd fought for, a balance of motherhood, artistic fulfillment, and emotional independence. Alex, who had been standing by with a quiet smile, approached after the curator left. "Congratulations," he said. "I'm proud of you." Something about his tone made Clara look up. She saw tears brimming in his eyes, tears of genuine admiration. For a moment she felt the rush of old emotions, how she once believed in a future with this man, yet she also remembered the heartbreak he'd caused. Still, she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." That evening they attended a private reception for participating artists. Lucas stayed at the hotel with a trusted babysitter. Guests mingled under strings of fairy lights, sipping wine and sampling canapes. The afterglow of her successful day lingered around Clara, giving her a buoyant confidence. Alex hovered near her, engaging in light conversation about her artwork. When the event ended, they found themselves walking along a moonlit path between the grapevines, the night air fragrant with ripe fruit. Soft music floated from the distance, and the sky was ablaze with stars. Clara paused by a wooden fence, gazing out at the vineyard under the silver glow of the moon. The memories of her wedding day, of humiliations endured in this very environment, resurfaced. Yet, this time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of those memories. Instead, she felt a quiet release, as if the vineyard's night breeze carried away the last remnants of her pain. Alex stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how much has changed since we were here last. How much I've changed." She turned to him, caught off guard by his earnestness. He continued, voice tremulous. "I was so blind, Clara. Obsessed with proving myself, with living up to my father's expectations. I didn't realize I was stomping on the very love that gave my life meaning." Clara's throat tightened. "We both made choices," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm grateful for Lucas, but the pain we went through, sometimes it still feels so fresh." Alex nodded. "I know it's not something we can just forget, but I want you to know that I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making amends, if that's what it takes." Silence enveloped them, punctuated by the quiet hum of insects in the vineyard. Slowly, tentatively, Alex reached for Clara's hand. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch sent a cascade of emotions through her: regret, longing, affection, and an ever-present caution. She looked down at their hands, remembering how once upon a time their fingers entwined so naturally. "I don't know if we can ever go back to how we were," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I'm not asking to go back," Alex said. "I want to move forward, start anew, if we can. Even if it's just as co-parents who respect each other. But if there's a chance, even the slightest possibility, that we can rebuild something, I want that chance." Clara let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared. Our history it's messy." He nodded, eyes glimmering. "I'm scared too, but it's a good kind of fear, like stepping onto a stage to perform something meaningful." She closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. The memory of his earlier betrayals was still there, but so was this raw, honest version of Alex, who had spent the past year proving that he could be better. She had seen him cradle Lucas with care, volunteer at the community center, support her art career without overshadowing it, apologize to Margaret, actions that spoke louder than any words. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her, breath held. She gave the faintest nod, exhaling softly. "Let's see where this goes, one step at a time." A tear slipped down Alex's cheek and he gently brushed it away, a soft laugh escaping his lips. He pulled her into a careful embrace, as though he might scare her off if he held on too tight. She rested her head against his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the sweet vineyard air. In that quiet moment, they weren't the broken couple they once were. They were two people forging a path toward redemption and, possibly, rediscovering love. In the months that followed, Clara and Alex navigated a new phase of their relationship. They saw a counselor together to address their past traumas, learned how to communicate without letting bitterness devour them. They fell into a rhythm of co-parenting that gradually blossomed into genuine partnership, and then something deeper. Their reconciliation didn't happen overnight. Clara insisted on maintaining her independence. She refused to move back into Alex's penthouse until she was certain this was what she wanted, not just what felt familiar. Alex respected her wishes, suggesting only that he spend more time in her apartment so Lucas wouldn't have to shuttle between two homes constantly. In the years to come, they built a life grounded in shared purpose. Clara opened her own art studio, mentoring young artists who faced financial barriers, much like she had in her youth. Alex continued to expand his philanthropic work, pouring resources into educational programs and community developments. Lucas grew up surrounded by a blend of creativity and compassion, learning that success meant more than money. It meant empathy, perseverance, and the courage to rectify one's mistakes. On quiet evenings, Clara and Alex often sat together in her studio. She painted, and he read or tinkered with business proposals on a tablet. Every so often he would glance up, catching her eye with a smile that said, "I'm grateful." She would smile back, painting a bright new stroke of color that symbolized hope on a canvas that was once filled with sorrow. And that, perhaps, was the truest form of a happy ending. Not a perfect life, but a real one, where two flawed individuals, bound by love and redemption, found the courage to forgive, to grow, and to create a future that honored the pains of the past without being defined by them. They had learned that sometimes the greatest fortune in the world lies not in riches or social standing, but in the fragile, resilient connection between two hearts, and the child who made their love story worth saving. And so, Clara and Alex's journey wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about rebuilding the future, one step at a time. From betrayal to redemption, from heartbreak to healing, they discovered that true love isn't just about grand gestures or second chances. It's about growth, accountability, and the courage to make things right. But what do you think? Can love truly conquer all? Would you have given Alex another chance, or was Clara's decision too forgiving? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful tale. There are more stories coming, filled with drama, twists, and life lessons that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good redemption story, and I'll see you in the next one.